and welcome to this, the second episode of Forrin, the podcast for foreigners of every flavour. My name's Patrick Garrett, and I'm broadcasting to you from Montpellier in France, and you are?
My name's Mike Bowden, and I'm, I can't steal your coming at you now, but I want to say I'm coming at you from Odense in Denmark.
You could always come at us, Mike. It's not an exclusive thing. So we did the first episode last week. Everything went pretty well. We got really good reception, so we're all very pleased about that. Are you pleased, Mike? Are you happy?
Yeah, we're just under 1 million listeners, so I won't be happy until we top that. But yeah.
Well, let's
so
see if
far, so
episode
good.
2 can push it over the over the top. Let's see how we go. So as last week, we're going to have a bit of a running order for these episodes. So this podcast will happen in 3 parts. So the first part is we're going to talk about some news in relation to being foreign in either France or Denmark. After that, we're going to talk about our topic of the day.
Yeah.
Which is going to be about, we're going to talk about how the language relates to culture and society, specifically in France, because as we're going to find out, French is incredibly important to French society. And for a last part, we're going to talk about our personal experiences of learning French and Danish in the early days when we arrived in France and Denmark. Just to recap, I've been living in France for 13 years. And Mike, how long have you been in Denmark for?
24 years, so I win. Yeah. But what I hear you say right now is that basically I have to wait about 20 minutes before I can talk about myself. That's
No. I'll make sure that we're pro Mike.
Okay,
Mike.
Great. Fantastic.
Don't worry. You're going to be there's going to be plenty of Mike in this podcast.
Fantastic. Okay, that's why I'm here.
That's why everyone's here, Mike. That's why all the fans are here. Like, if there's no Mike, there's no podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
basically.
That is my next tattoo. But yeah.
So this first part, we're going to talk a bit about the news. Mike talked about some of the news from Denmark last week. So I'm going to talk a bit about some news from France this week. And the news story I've picked is a story from a French newspaper called Libération. It's a really left-wing French newspaper. It was launched by Maoists in the 60s, Mike.
Wow.
So it's pure communism, pure red, and it's about the Parti Socialiste, which is kind of the French equivalent of the Labour Party, I suppose, in Britain, presenting their ideas in relation to the immigration bill that's going to be presented to the Senate in November. So, at the moment in France, the news is full of this. Basically, just to give you an idea of what Macron and his team are going to present to the Senate.
Macron and his Macronis. Sorry, I couldn't resist it. I'm sorry.
The Macroniste.
Yeah,
as they're called. It's basically they're going to present this bill that says. There are 2 main parts to it. The first part is that it's going to be able, the authorities are going to be able to deport people faster. So if you're issued or if you become a OQTF, which stands for Obligation de quitter le territoire français.
Wow.
That means you gotta go.
Okay. So even though it sounds good, even though it sounds really good when you say it, you don't want to be it.
No, you don't want to be one of those. No,
okay, right.
And it's going to make it easier to get rid of those guys, but also it's going to allow for the regularization of what's called in France sans-papiers, which basically means illegal workers.
Right.
But only if they work in certain professions. So basically, there's a lot of opposition to this from the Les Républicains, which are the French version of the Tories. They've said they won't vote for it, so it's not over yet. So that's pretty much it. It's going to allow Macron and, the French state to get rid of people it doesn't like, a lot easier. But also it's going to basically allow for people who are illegal, or some people who are illegal in France, to be legal. They're going to give them working permits for a year.
So the right wing are basically they're saying absolutely nobody ever. And Macron is saying not a lot of people, but some.
Yeah, that's right. So
Right,
like
yeah.
Macron's a centrist basically. So it's kind of he has to sort of like sit between the left and the right, literally. And this news story that's on Libération, it's basically the Parti Socialiste saying that they want to present an alternative stance to this immigration bill, because their fear is that it's becoming an entire debate that's fueled by the far right, that's fear mongering about immigrants and blah blah blah.
Exactly. Yeah. How does it? Sorry to interrupt. How does it work in France when you said about Macron? It's still up in the air because of the right wing party. I've forgotten the name now. Said they won't vote for it. So Macron, to get a majority in Parliament, Macron actually needs both sides of the House to
basically vote. He needs, like, this is a bill that's going to the Senate.
Right.
So like they've used what's like being viewed as like an unconstitutional power to force it through the lower house.
Okay.
But now they have to take it to the equivalent of the House of Lords in Britain. So like in the Senate, they don't have a majority. So they need a vote. If they can win over the Tories, les Républicains, then it will pass.
Okay. Right.
But so what they don't want to do, obviously, is, well, I would hope, obviously, is talk to Marine Le Pen and the fascist party. So like, so basically, what they're trying to do is find a compromise that everyone will vote for. So like the Parti Socialiste here are saying they're saying, like, it's a load of bollocks basically, and they're trying to present something that's a bit more inclusive. So what they want to do is allow work permits across a far broader range of professions. So, like, if you're illegal or you're working in France illegally, then there'll be a much better chance of you being able to stay, basically, if the Parti Socialiste get their way.
Okay.
And also, what they're saying is that they want a framework for people to be able to stay that really have nothing to do with the world of work. The whole debate is being centered around this idea that you're only useful if you work.
Yes.
And obviously, what they're saying is that obviously there are a lot of people. Certainly there are people, such as unaccompanied minors who come here as like refugees from wars, people who are fleeing climate problems, etc., that don't really fall into this category. So they want to provide a framework for those people to be able to stay. And what they're saying in a nutshell, that they want people to be included rather than being integrated. And the conclusion of their speech that they did to the press for this news story is that they see the state as having a duty to provide not just tools for learning the language or being integrated into the values of the Republic. It's a really French thing to say that, the Republic has values.
Yeah.
But the state actually has a duty to provide training, access to healthcare, access to culture, etc., etc. It has a duty to include people rather than to integrate people. And that, Mike, is my news of the week.
Fantastic. Well, there's to make a slight comparison. There's something in Denmark called the website, the National Integration Barometer.
Oh my God!
And and it's
that sounds fucking terrifying.
And it's a barometer that kind of statistically measures 9 different kind of areas of integration from and just to mirror in a way what you said, number 1, which is getting better, there's these kind of up arrows, green arrows for a positive development, and down red arrows for negative elements. But number 1, goal number 1 is work. And so
I'm sorry, I just choke on my tea.
And it says here more immigrants, and again Denmark does stipulate this kind of I don't even know how to translate the word. So you're an immigrant if you have just come in from a different country. Let's just say you've come in from Turkey, and yesterday you're an immigrant. But if you came in from Turkey 20, 30 years ago and you've had a kid, then you're also kind of classed as something that's called, I don't know how to translate it, it's called an efterkommer. It means you've come afterwards.
Okay.
So there are still kind of problems, or they say there's still kind of problems with the children of these kind of first generation immigrants.
Okay.
So it says more. So goal number 1, work more immigrants and children of immigrants and again with the stipulation with non-Western origins have to work. That is goal number 1. Goal number 2. Again, with the immigrants and the children of immigrants, etc., have to have a kind of have to have done their A levels again, high school. That's goal number 2, and goal number 3, which might be a good segue to the next point, is the language.
Right.
More immigrants and again non-Western and immigrants of non-Western origin have to learn Danish, and then there are 6 others which I won't get into, but. Again, it just kind of mirrors what you were talking about working, really important, and then and education number 2, and then learning the language number 3. And learning the language, according to this barometer, is in a negative development. So, but it is empirically based. It's about how many, for example, if you click on it, you get a graph, a table about how many, for example, the percentage of immigrants with non-Western origin that pass their kind of 5th form or the last year in a primary school in Danish, in written and oral Danish, and it's kind of falling compared to Western immigrants. The percentage is sort of falling slightly, which is why it's in a negative development. So, but yeah, that's just that kind of, in a way, I think draws a parallel to what you were saying. Yeah.
No, it does definitely. That sounds pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
To be honest,
it's
but serious business.
You can't. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and
that's it.
And I've got the statistics to prove it.
They never lie.
No, that's it. They never lie.
So to move on then from that, let's talk about how important French is to the French state in terms of immigration. What I really wanted to talk about is the importance of the French language to French culture and to French society on a political level, and what the messages we receive about the French language from the government really mean for foreigners and immigrants in general. I mean, I am an immigrant. I am affected by these issues, so I wanted to talk about that. So I'm just going to start off by saying that the French language to the French state, if you haven't guessed already, is unbelievably important. It's something that I've learned over a long period of time from being here. I've been in the French university system for over 6 years, and the first year and a half of that was learning French as a foreign language. And I can tell you that French to the French state is one of the most important things there is, Mike. It doesn't get much more important than that. Just to prove that, I've dug up a report that was commissioned by the French government in 2018. It was released in June this year. It's massive and amazing on the state of the French language, both in France and the rest of the world. It's called Rapport au Parlement sur la langue française, which means that it's a report to the Parliament on the French language. And I'll put a link to it in this episode's description. I'll put a link to the news story as well.
Great.
So just to give you an idea of what French means to France as a country and as a nation and as an idea, from page 5 it says, I'll read this in French, La langue française est un facteur de cohésion au cœur du pacte républicain.
Wow.
Which means roughly, the French language is a factor of cohesion at the heart of the Republican Pact. Now, often in French politics, France and the Republic are spoken as being two different things. When Macron signs off his addresses on TV, he says, Vive la République et vive la France. They're two separate things. Like, France is a nation and the Republic is kind of a set of ideals. So right. in French political discourse, you often hear about the values of the Republic. And it's at the heart of the Republican Pact, Mike. Like it's right there, like holding it together. And another quote from the 6th page, it says, again in French, Pilier de notre culture, ciment de notre société et long monde, le français relève de notre responsabilité collective, which translated means pillar of our culture, not a pillar, Mike, the pillar.
That's it.
The pillar.
Yeah.
Cement of our society and world language, French is our collective responsibility. The responsibility effectively being to maintain it like some sort of treasure.
Yes.
I guess. Which is all well and good, but what I really want to talk about is what this actually means if you can't speak the language particularly well, or if you haven't been here for very long, because, the answer, unfortunately, is probably that this type of, I would say, undeniably nationalist political stance, in relation to the French language is probably going to cause you a lot of difficulty. If you, at best, really, and I've experienced this firsthand. I'm going to ask you in a second if you have as well. Like I can be seen sometimes, because I'm English, as diluting French culture, and obviously, culture is has multiple meanings. It doesn't.
You're
just
English,
mean
but you're improving on it. Yeah, come on. You're enriching their culture.
I think that. You know what I mean? Culture can mean cultural products. It can also mean, a system of ritual for a group of people. Obviously,
traditions.
It doesn't.
Stuff,
yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean one thing. So I can be seen as diluting French culture, if you like, and at worst, I can be seen as a threat, as a sort of threat. We often see this in terms of Anglicisms, for example. People can get really shirty about it, and actually in that report, it says apparently 1 out of 2, literally 50% of people in France get angry or find themselves getting annoyed if they see English words in advertising, for example. So I just wanted to ask you, could you relate to that as, in Denmark? Does any of that sort of ring true for you as well?
No, not really. There are maybe a couple of nationalist parties that have some kind of pushback about how much English there is in the education system. There was a case that the Danish People's Party, Dansk Folkeparti, brought up a few years ago, that lots of new kind of subjects were being taught in English at university, and they wanted those either reduced or kind of forced to speak Danish. But being English, especially, I can't say especially in Denmark, but being English is Denmark. Being English in Denmark, there is a different kind of status to it.
Okay.
So the fact that when I speak English, I think people find it. They don't. It's not provocative to them. Lots of Danish people in their everyday language will say anyway or whatever or by the way, and it's generally accepted. So there's this whole other social status that the English language, and maybe the country England, and I would also include America in that. So the pushback against that, there are some mutterings of, is Danish being eroded by the English language, but it's not really a national debate, and it's not something that I meet in any way in my everyday. In fact, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite.
I mean, I could say like that specifically that, I mean, I this isn't like something that I come up against like every day or anything, but I certainly have come up against it where people have expressed like pretty strong opinions about the danger French faces in terms of English.
Okay.
And to be honest, like the official stance and the official response, I guess, is effectively paradoxal. Apparently French is the most important thing in the world to France, and if you don't speak it, then you need to learn to speak it. You know what I mean? You have to speak it properly, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's also the simple truth that the international community speaks English, and our generation, we've spoken about this before, in France, like is generally pretty bad at speaking English. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, or saying it's just something that is absolutely true. That people in their sort of 50s or 40s and 50s were effectively sort of shielded from the sort of wave of English. For example, if you go to Berlin or go to Germany or et cetera, a lot more people speak English who are our age. But that in France has only really happened with Gen Z. So like there's this sort of like dual debate, is that you have to protect French because it's the core of society, but also you have to internationalize France, French people still have to be able to speak English effectively, otherwise they can't work properly, on the international stage. So it can be a bit tricky sometimes, there's no sort of like really clear answer to it.
No, I mean, it is a really difficult balance. I think it's a difficult balance also in Denmark. Denmark, again, doesn't maybe have the same kind of cultural history as France, and maybe the same sense of national importance, or maybe doesn't have as much to back it up with as France does, without wishing to criticize Denmark. But I think, the balance between, there's only really 5.5 million people that speak Danish. So there is a desire to preserve it and to maintain it. But at the same time, a second language like German or English is something that's widely accepted. I mean, a lot of Danes speak German as a second language, especially if you live in the south of Jutland. They've grown up with it on television. And most young people. And I haven't really, the only person I had problems communicating with was my father-in-law or ex-father-in-law.
Okay.
He couldn't speak it. My mother-in-law could understand me and could reply just a little bit. But that was a generation of people, like when I came over, they were like late 50s, early 60s. But most people of our generation and younger can all understand and converse in English, pretty much.
That's crazy. I mean, that really isn't the case here. I mean, like, the people I'm in university with now who are basically in their early 20s, they can speak English like really well. I mean, like, we do like master's seminars in English, and they have no problem with those. And, we all, contribute in English and so forth. I mean, I really enjoy those lessons. It's, it's really great to hear people like, learning English and like being able to communicate like, multilingually is amazing to me, because, being blocked from doing that for national reasons to me makes no sense. Not really. But, well, not at all, to be honest. But they, certainly for, the kind of the dads that I meet, for example, the mums and dads that I meet, their English is they can't speak it, basically.
How do you deal with it?
Because they know.
Do you start shouting at them? Speak slow and loud.
Do you understand me?
Cup of tea.
I speak French. I mean, this is why I went to university, because, like, it's pretty important. As I hope I've illustrated to speak French in France. It's a pretty critical thing.
I kind of know the answer. This is a cheat question because you told me in the WhatsApp chat, but as France has such a kind of places so much importance on learning French and the French language, if you do come to the country and you need or want to learn the language, do you have to pay yourself?
Well, Mike.
Well,
I got some stats for you.
Fantastic.
Like, basically, so around 150,000 people sign up for French lessons every year, and almost they're in France, and they pay for them. That's how they know. That's how the state knows that that amount of people are signed up for them. And only around 27,000 people per year are provided with French lessons free of charge by the state.
That is amazingly bad.
So to give you an idea of the amount of people that are arriving here every year, so like around 300,000 carte de séjour, which is like a residency permit, were issued in 2022. 300,000 new ones. But like a third of that was like students. So around 100,000 of that was students. So around 200,000 people that weren't students were given like legal status to live in France in 2022. And basically the 27,000 people that were given these free French lessons they're given them by law. It's actually in law that if you come, and this only applies to people that have arrived in France from outside of the EU. Right. So like it's written in law that if you come to France from outside of the EU, you have to attend about, I think it's 90 to 100 hours of French lessons in the first year of your residency in France.
And you have to pay yourself.
No, that's
okay.
Free.
That is free, right?
So basically, the only lessons that like France provides for free to nurture this core of its society, the core of its culture, the very essence of its being, Mike.
The pillar.
the pillar of all things French. It only provides to those by law that it actually has to provide. There is no other provision, which, like, you know, harks back to the news story that I was talking about earlier, where, like, basically the left wing, the sort of centre left, is basically saying your immigration policy is just full of shit, basically, because, like, you know, you say one thing and you're making no real effort to include anybody into any of this at all. It's just bluster, basically.
Yeah, it's quite strange because in Denmark, with me, I was trying to find the webpage that I got up earlier, but as far as I can tell, that learning Danish is free, completely free. The only thing you might have to do, I think, if you're over 18 and you've come here for work or to study, then you have to pay a deposit of 2,000 Danish kroners. But that deposit obviously is a deposit, so you get it back. But to actually go to Danish language school, as far as I can tell, and anyone wants to correct me on it, I did Google it earlier, and I'm trying to ferociously Google it as I'm speaking right now. But it is free. It's a free thing. So
that's just unbelievable.
So Denmark puts its money where its mouth is. France. Yeah.
I'm gonna say, like, honestly, like, I'm not gonna go off on one, but, like, honestly, like, you know, in this third part, we're gonna talk a bit about our personal experiences of what it was like when we arrived in these countries and couldn't speak the languages. But I'm gonna preface, like, what I'm gonna say with it was really horrible.
Okay.
So, like, what was it like for you?
Learning the language. We're already there. Okay, because I was just about to hit you with some Danish.
Go on, let's have some Danish. Go on.
But the culture minister, or not the culture minister, but the culture ministry is the word I'm looking for. They have a language section, and I'm going to try. You know, French sounds so much better than Danish, but it says here: "Sproget er bærer af tradition og kulturel kontinuitet, og sproget er en motor for kulturel vækst. Uden det danske sprog er det vanskeligt at forestille sig dansk kultur." And that translates to: language is the bearer of tradition and cultural continuity, and language is a motor for cultural growth. Without the Danish language, it is difficult to imagine Danish culture. But you may laugh, Pat.
I am laughing.
You are laughing, but if I could challenge you on that, is there any part of that isn't true, though?
Well, it's a bit of a sticky wicket, isn't it? Because
in a way, I understand the kind of the grandioseness, and maybe that's what you're laughing at. But I mean, as you were saying about with French, with the idea that you can kind of agree with it, but at the same time, everyone also has to speak English. And if you're looking at Denmark as a country of 5.5 million people that has its own, as you were talking about before, traditions and cultural. It has its own traditions, then language is a way to also communicate that tradition.
So I do agree that, like, language is important for social cohesion. I mean, that's just obvious. If you can't communicate with people, then things become pretty difficult pretty quickly, as we're gonna talk about in a minute. What I don't agree with is excluding people. You know, based on
absolutely,
that they can't speak the language, and that they can't, they're not being effectively given aid to speak it. I mean, like, what you've just said there is, like, the Danish political message is that Danish as a language is critical for Danish culture.
Yes,
but they also accept the fact that, you know, people have to be able to communicate internationally because, you know, there are only, you know, just over 5 million people who live in Denmark.
Yeah,
and they provide all of the tools anybody could ever need for free to learn the language.
Yep. You moved to the wrong country, Pat. You moved to the wrong.
As opposed to France, you know, it's a pretty. I mean, nationalism in France can be extremely bellicose. You know, like it's not much fun a lot of the time. You know, there's a lot of racism in France. You know, for a variety of reasons. But, you know, I hope that. What would I think about, like, you know, the language being essential for culture. It's tricky.
Well, even the jokes we're making are kind of very cultural inferences. We're kind of bringing up, and maybe other English people will kind of get where we're coming from and laugh. Where maybe the French listeners or Danish listeners will maybe understand some of it, but not all of it. So in a way, I can kind of understand the idea behind it. But I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, you have to allow for people to have a life who maybe can't speak it when they get here, or at least have trouble learning a different language, because sometimes learning a language is difficult. And I
mean, to give you just an anecdotal example, like I met a lady on the tram in Montpellier the other day, and she heard my son. I was speaking English to my son Arthur, and she said to Arthur, you can speak English, and he said, yeah, I'm British, and she was from Nigeria. She lived in Nigerian. The language of instruction in Nigeria is English,
right?
And she'd been in France for 4 years. She'd lived in Britain. She didn't like it because of the weather.
Neither did we.
And she had. I said to her, how do you like it here? How are you getting on? And she said, like, what I really wish is that there were more opportunities in English, because there aren't any. Effectively, she had 2 masters, Mike. You know what I mean? She was here with her family. She couldn't work. You know what I mean? It's because, like, I wouldn't want to say it's specifically because of this sort of like political posturing, but I would go as far as to say it probably doesn't help. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like all of the job, for example, like, I'm applying to do my work placement now for the 2nd year of my master's. And you have to be able to speak English and French fluently. For all I'm applying for, like, media jobs in Paris, I mean, you have to be able to speak, like, fluent English and native French. Do you know what I mean? But you can't just speak English, because then no one will understand you, and you can't not speak English
because no one will understand you.
Because no one will understand you. Absolute nightmare.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because again, it reminds me of, I've been kind of maybe talking Denmark up, but especially in terms of education. Again, it's been up for political debate, and I'm not sure where the land lies right now, but there have been lots of cases of people coming, again, from non-Western backgrounds with, as you say, a master's or university degree, or they're trained nurses, but they can't actually get a job in Denmark. And language is maybe one of the barriers, but the other one is that, as you could... if you remember the integration barometer, number 2 was education, and Denmark is this huge education country. So even if it's a master's, the university or the way it's studied or the degree is just not recognized. And so in order to become recognized, guess what you need? The language, because you might need to do a few courses to kind of get your degree or your training to the Danish level. But you can't get your degree or training to the Danish level to get a job before you can not just read and write Danish, but academic. You'd have to actually study, which is a whole other ballgame. So there are people here who are skilled, but there is a big debate about maybe relaxing some laws because we need work. People, as it's a European problem. We actually do need immigration, believe it or not, kids. We actually need people to come here. So yeah, and I'm not sure where the actual political what the actual political situation is right now on that, but it is definitely a problem with which relates to what you just said about the Nigerian woman there.
So we're going to talk like briefly about our experiences of being non-communicative.
I picked it up day one, mate. I picked it up day one.
So like, what were your you arrived from London, innit?
Yeah.
So like, what were your first years like in Denmark in terms of language?
Well, I'm kind of the poster child for this integration barometer. I'm quite surprised there's not a kind of picture of my face on there, because I basically did in the order that they wanted me to do it. I was very lucky that I went into a cafe, a bar, and asked if they had work. And the guy who was kind of run it, a guy called Mark, was English. And I had no idea. And so he gave me a job as a dishwasher. And he kind of said, as soon as you can learn the language or understand what's being said to you, you can move upstairs and work in the kitchen, which is motivation enough. I did go to the, what I was mentioned earlier about the free kind of language classes in the evening, but then my work became full time. So I sort of learned it on the job. And then after working there for a few years, I suddenly realized that maybe I should get an education. And then so I did step 2 of the integration barometer, which was getting an education. But again, my written Danish was really bad at that point. And then step 3, the language sort of came into place. But if we're talking about, are we talking about the early days? Like, you know, the first couple of,
Talk about whatever you want, you know what I mean? It's like, I mean, like, yeah, go for it. Do what you want.
Well, there was a lot of sitting around the dinner table with my my ex-wife's family's house, and
just to be clear, your ex-wife is Danish, right?
Yeah, she's Danish. Yeah, I came here with a Dane. I think I mentioned that last week. But for those of you who are just listening for the first time, I came over here with a Danish woman in 1999. So the first few months she was my personal translator, which was tiring for her and for me. There was a lot of times where all the family or whoever would be sitting around talking, laughing and joking. And then after all the laughter dies down, I then get told the joke. And, you know, yeah, you know, it's a bit late for that kind of thing. And so it was, but I was very lucky in the fact that I did have my ex-wife there to help me and to translate things for me. And so, yeah, that maybe it still was difficult, but it was made a lot easier by the fact that I had a native speaker. I was living with a native speaker at the time. What about you?
It was pretty horrible. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, like for a start, like I'm married to Fiona. She's English as well. She could speak French. Kind of. She had kind of A-level French. She could speak English. She could speak French pretty well, but not amazingly well. So she couldn't. You know, she could only sort of like do.
So the Republic didn't accept her when she came. It wasn't enough.
We weren't really well accepted. No, like we were. We lived in the middle of nowhere. We weren't in a town. We were right out in the woods in a place called Corrèze, and. We neither of us could really communicate very well at all. I mean, there weren't very many people there, and it took a long time. Those first few years, I mean, I started having there was no aid provided by the state at all, and so, I mean, I was working in English. We spoke in English in the house, and really, even in supermarkets and stuff like that, talking to. I mean, I couldn't even order a coffee when we first arrived, and it was.
Un café,
c'est ça, pardon. I mean, it could be pretty hostile. I'm not going to lie. You know what I mean? Like people could be, you know, if you can't speak the language at all, like you know, some people, you know, really don't like that. And even in supermarkets and stuff like that, even asking for, you know, I remember specifically trying to buy some raisins for the kids. You know, our children were pretty young when we first arrived. I mean, the boys were like a year old. They're 14 now.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that conversation. It was just awful. You know what I mean? I mean, like me being a sort of white British man, you know, I'm pretty much like
what's wrong with that?
The world's most privileged demographic.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, I was kind of like shocked into this situation where you know I couldn't speak to anybody about anything. You know, so basically. It was a bit similar to your situation in a way, in that you know Fiona could speak French like you know well enough to sort of get by. I mean, a bit better than that. She could speak it like okay, but you know, it wasn't until like I'd been living in you know I had a sort of string of French teachers over the years, but like it really wasn't until we'd been here for about 8 years, for about 7 or 8 years that I went to university and started learning French seriously. I mean, by that point, I passed a B1 exam.
Right.
So like, I could like, buy tickets. I was like autonomous in the fact that I could sort of like, go into shops and buy stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I've been living there for like nearly 8 years, just to give you an idea. So like, if you're listening to this and, thinking, should I go to a foreign country? Go to Denmark. You know what I mean? Where
we don't want you here. We don't want more. We don't want more people here. Don't come here. Go to Sweden.
No, it was pretty horrible. I'm not going to lie. All of the everything you said about like not getting jokes and blah blah blah. I mean, it was just like that times 20. It was just awful, basically. So like, I don't regret it now because obviously, I'm pretty fluent in French and like I said, I'm doing a master's in French and blah, 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 and, that's fine. But
you're also writing, I mean, come on, you're also writing a kind of a book in French, Pat.
I did write a novel in French last year. Yeah. I did do that. So, yeah.
Available from all good bookstores.
That's it. I wish. We'll see. But like, not being able to communicate at all is an extremely humbling experience, which is probably why we're, part of the reason that we're doing this podcast. It's one of the main things that we have in common. Is the fact that we had to go through that. It's
coming from London and sorry to interrupt. But coming from London and feeling kind of king of the castle, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm downstairs in a kitchen in a foreign country and everyone's kind of, and again, a lot of people are speaking to me in English, which is nice, but there were a few people who insisted that they didn't want to talk to me in English, which is their prerogative. So being kind of just told what to do by everyone and everything and just going to like, this sort of kitchen porter position and just everybody speaking a different language around you every day. Because people were nice. If people addressed me, I was lucky enough. If people addressed me directly, most of the time, they would talk to me in English. But when you're sitting with your colleagues and when there's chat going on around you, it's all just in a foreign language. And you just, So there's only one way to, you just have to dig yourself out of that hole, really.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Like I said, I've been in education for like quite a long time now. I worked for a long time. You see, like I worked in English like when we first arrived here. And, it really was like after I finished working, it was my absolute priority was to learn the language. Like as I described before, like if you don't have French in France, you're pretty dead, really. You can't really do much. So that's why I did what I did. But yeah,
it's also important to note that it's, even though I'm not trying to play the hard luck story, because I understand that there are a lot of people who maybe come to Denmark and also France that don't have the same kind of resources that perhaps we have. As you said, we're like white European males. We're kind of like top of the pyramid. So it's easy for me to sort of say, I worked my way up, and I did, but I also had the resources to do it, and I also had the support at home.
Well, there we go. And I'm glad you had the resources to sort it out, Mike. And
so am I, Pat. I did nothing to earn them myself. I was born with them, so I'm lucky. I'm just lucky. That's it.
I think we were both born lucky, Mike, and I
as Lady Gaga says, Pat, I was born this way, But I think she was talking about something else, to be honest. It's Anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
That is another podcast, and I think we're gonna wrap this one up now. We've extended our time limit by a bit, but
you've got a lot of editing work to do, young man.
Yeah, that's it. But so I'm gonna wrap this up and get on with that. Many thanks for listening. Find us on Instagram, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We've got a link tree on our Spotify. That's it. We've got a link tree on our bio on Acast, on our social media. On Instagram, we're at Forrin Podcast.
Yeah,
is that right?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
splendid. So if you want to follow us on there, that would be absolutely amazing. And if you don't, well, that is entirely up to you.
No, it's not. It's not their choice. They have to do it.
Yeah, they do have to do it.
Do not allow people to opt out, because they will do it, Pat. So you have to subscribe and everything else. And also next week, you would think to kind of carry on this language thing, because you've heard Pat speak French tonight, and it was as fluent as I think you could get. You've also heard me speak a bit of Danish. So you would think that all our kind of social problems and being part of the community were solved by the fact that now we can speak fluent language. And we're going to and that is what we're actually going to talk about next, is being a part of the society through language, and how the Danish and French society are actually, as in the people that we meet, how we are greeted and how we're kind of received when we speak our learned fluent language. Yeah.
Splendid. And that's going to be in 2 weeks. So many thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.
Bye-bye.